So let's jump right into our first case study. And trust me, it sounds more like something out of a weird sci-fi B-movie than actual history. We're talking about Project Acoustic Kitty.
So what's the first thing that jumps out at you? It's gotta be the price tag, right? The CIA poured $20 million into this thing. And remember, that's 1960s money. All for this completely audacious idea of turning your average house cat into a high-tech, four-legged listening device.
So how was this supposed to work? Well, the plan itself was just a wild piece of engineering. Step 1, vets would surgically implant a tiny microphone in the cat's ear canal and a little radio transmitter at the base of its skull. Step 2, and this is where it gets, a little difficult, was training the cat to go up to specific Soviet targets. So for its very first mission, this newly minted agent gets let out of a van across the street from a park. 2 Soviet officials are sitting on a bench, just talking. The cat takes a couple of steps, looks both ways, and then immediately wanders right into the street and gets flattened by a taxi. Mission over. So yeah, not a great start. The takeaway here is that this wasn't just some wacky idea someone floated. It was a hugely expensive, officially documented, complete failure. The final declassified CIA report basically said that while the science, putting the bug in the cat, actually worked, the art of getting a cat to do what you want was, well, let's just say, not a viable field of study. All right, so moving on from our field feline spies, what's next? Well, if you can't rely on cats, maybe you can just rely on the human mind itself. This is where we get into the really paranormal stuff. Yeah, so the US Army's Project Stargate was all about trying to weaponize this very idea, remote viewing. The concept was, on the surface, pretty simple. Could you train soldiers, or even just regular people, to use their minds to see inside secret Soviet missile silos, or locate hostages, or track enemy submarines, all from a quiet room in Fort Meade, Maryland? And look at this timeline. This wasn't just a weekend experiment. We're talking nearly 2 decades where the US military was seriously pouring money and resources into psychic phenomena. They even had offshoots like the Gateway process, where they used special audio tapes to try and induce out-of-body experiences, all for the sake of intelligence gathering. I mean, this was a serious long-term effort. But here's the reality check. This table just perfectly illustrates the huge gap between what the program hoped it could do and what it actually accomplished. Declassified reports showed that, sometimes the remote viewers came up with something kind of interesting, but it was almost always vague, totally incorrect, and absolutely never actionable intelligence. The program was eventually shut down for one very simple reason: it just didn't work. Okay, so now we escalate. We're moving from the bizarre to the truly chilling, because our first 2 examples, they were failures of science, maybe failures of reason. This next one, though, is a failure of morality. This was a plan that didn't target a foreign enemy. It targeted American citizens. So the year is 1962. The Bay of Pigs invasion has just been a total disaster. The top brass at the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, are desperate for an excuse to go to war with Fidel Castro's Cuba. So they sit down and draft a top-secret proposal. And the method they came up with is just terrifying. Their solution wasn't to engage Cuban forces. No, it was to stage what we call false flag operations. The declassified documents lay out this absolutely shocking plan for the United States government to commit acts of terrorism in its own cities against its own people and then blame it all on Cuba to create this wave of public outrage that would demand an invasion. Just look at this direct quote from the plan itself. "We could develop a communist Cuban terror campaign. We could sink a boatload of Cubans en route to Florida, real or simulated." Just let that sink in for a second. Real or simulated. This wasn't some fuzzy idea. This was a cold, calculated proposal to murder innocent civilians for political gain, and it was drafted at the absolute highest levels of the US military. Now, fortunately for all of us, this horrifying plan was stopped dead in its tracks. The proposal made its way to the desk of President John F. Kennedy, and he was, by all accounts, completely appalled. He rejected the plan outright, and it wasn't long after that he actually removed the chairman of the Joint Chiefs who had signed off on the whole thing. But, and this is a really important point, Operation Northwoods wasn't just some one-off moment of madness. It existed in a context, alongside other extreme programs. Think about the infamous Project MKUltra, where the CIA was illegally dosing American citizens with LSD, without their consent, to study mind control. It shows a disturbing pattern, right? A willingness to cross these profound ethical lines. So all of this brings us to a really fundamental question for any historian. How in the world do we even know about any of this stuff? Well, the short answer is declassification. Over many years, thanks to things like the Freedom of Information Act and congressional investigations, these secrets, they eventually get dragged out into the sunlight. And when these secrets come out, they force us to look at the central dilemma of the entire Cold War era. On one side, you have this desperate push for national security, right? To get any advantage over the enemy. But on the other side, what's the cost? We're talking about abandoning the very moral and legal principles that you're supposedly trying to protect. And what's so revealing when you look at this chart is just how long some of these really questionable programs were allowed to run. MKUltra went on for 20 years. Project Stargate for 17. Even the disaster that was Acoustic Kitty wasn't shut down right away. These weren't just bad ideas that fizzled out. They were long-term institutional investments. So as we wrap things up today, I want to leave you with this final thought to chew on. All of these stories, they only came to light decades after they happened, which forces us to ask a really critical and maybe a little unsettling question. If these are the secrets we know about from the past, what secrets are still being kept right now? What operations are happening today that historians in the future will be looking back on with the same kind of shock and disbelief? Think about it. Class dismissed.